Okay, great. So today we have Dr. Bernie here. Lovely to see you, Bernie. And as it's Stress Awareness Month, we thought we'd have a chat to you, find out a bit more about yourself, what you do, what makes people stressed, some ways that perhaps you can help with daily stresses that people are feeling at the moment. So yeah, welcome. Nice to see you. And how would you describe yourself, Bernie? Because I always sort of say stress management specialist, but I know you've got many strings to your bow. So how would you describe yourself?
Yeah, stress management specialist would definitely be how I describe myself. I like to think that we're not experts at this yet. There probably are experts out in the world, but
You're being
definitely, yeah. But I just think we've got so much to learn about this topic. For me, I've spent the last kind of 7 years deep diving into it and specializing in coaching people and speaking on the topic. But I guess before that, even as an undergraduate, part of my degree was in occupational health, occupational stress. My PhD was in stress and anxiety for elite performers. And I've always kind of studied it, before it was a thing, before we realized how much of an impact it's having on society, it's always been on my radar and it's always been an interest of mine. So I guess I specialize in it, but I think it's the old adage, once you realize when you're learning about something, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And I think that's kind of where we are with stress. I think as a society at large, there's so much we don't know yet. So I like to think I specialize in it and geek out on it a little bit. Yeah.
Amazing. And I mean, it's interesting you said that you started studying it before, I guess it became trendy, not that it's a popular trend as such, but something, we probably didn't have Stress Awareness Month when you started studying. What would you say what would you say is the number one thing that people would come to you and ask for help with?
I think it's hilarious, right? Because not that I'm laughing at people, but the weird thing is, people will come to me looking for support with stress. They know I'm a stress management coach or consultant, or they'll invite me to speak to their staff or their employees. And so you could assume by default, people are acknowledging that they're stressed. Most of the time, people come and they're saying things like, I just feel broken. And I think what people are coming with is this symptom, this feeling of overwhelm and exhaustion. And so, most of the time, it's the sensation that they want to feel better, but they don't want to leave what I call the machine, which is society, the workplace, the driver behind everything that we all do, the machine that pushes us to achieve. So I think the biggest problem people have right now is the machine is just pushing us all. And we don't know how to stop. We don't have to get off it because everybody's in the same boat to an extent.
Yeah.
And people are dropping like flies. They're just overwhelmed and exhausted. And they're acknowledging that. So they come to me and they kind of go like, how do I fix this? How do I feel better? Why am I failing? Why am I so weak? And it's sad because actually I think they also think they're on their own. They're alone with it. And every Monday I email all of my clients, a collective. I used to send an individual email to each of them checking in. How are you? What's going on? And I was like, you know what? Actually, they're all in the same boat, but they all think they're in isolation. And now I send a group email to say, look, hi guys, as a group, we're all in this together. Some of you are saying this, some of you are feeling this, but actually I hope you find that all of you are feeling similar symptoms and all of you feeling a similar thing because of how we are living and what's going on in the world. So to me, that the work is definitely to help pick people up initially, but that's just the start of the journey. Understanding why they're overwhelmed, understanding why they're exhausted. That's what the coaching is all about for me.
Yeah, I love that idea of the group kind of acknowledgement that you're all in the same boat. You mentioned that people will come and say they're broken or perhaps they're exhausted. Do you think there's still kind of a stigma around saying, I'm really stressed, I'm burnt out?
Absolutely. Yeah. So many people, they really need to be leaving work or having time off, but they're so scared to do it. And I think they come to me hoping that I can get them through that and that they don't need to go to their HR department, or they don't need to tell their husband or their wife or their friends, or their partners. And they don't want to admit it, And I know between sessions when they come and have coaching, they straight back into that, as I call the machine or the grind. And my work with them is to help them to kind of build that confidence, that kind of what I call like radical acceptance of self, like that actually, do you know what, it's okay that you're feeling like this, that other people are too, and that we need to start talking about that. I think we talk about it largely in society. We're about to talk about mental health, but we are almost like not talking about stress, because somehow we can say, like, I think society, we're better at saying I feel overwhelmed, in a sense I feel depressed or feel anxious, and people know kind of how to deal with that a bit better. But when we say we're burnt out, we're stressed, there's sort of a negative stigma or connotation to it, that we're somehow weak and it's our fault, that we're not coping with demands of the world. So we're not depressed or anxious because that's an illness, and that would kind of, I'm not saying it's the stigma's gone from that completely, but I feel like with stress, the people I work with anyway, they are very much reluctant, you know, and almost the work I do with them is helping them to come out, which is a weird thing to say, but to out themselves to their partners, to their friends, to their employers, and go, actually, I do need to take some time off. And when they do that, not all do, and that's okay too, but if they do, and when they do, it's usually a significant turning point in their recovery.
Yeah, I guess the difference perhaps with the medical mental health conditions is that stress seems so almost vague, you know, it's a word that's used to express an immediate emotion or a state within your day, or I don't know, it could, you know, it's used so frequently, the word I'm stressed, this is stress, this is causing me stress. It just feels like there's such a scale of stress, whereas I feel like with depression or anxiety, it's almost kind of I don't want to belittle those conditions at all, but you could probably follow more of this almost a checklist.
Definition.
Yeah, with stress.
That's a really good point, you know, and I think that's so true, because if you look at the literature, this is what's fascinating, right? If you look at the literature, the definition of stress is different depending on who is talking about it. So if psychologists will say one thing, sociologists and economists, excuse me, a behaviorist, you know, an occupational therapist, everybody will call it different. A GP, everyone's something different. Yeah. So if within the literature we are defining it in different ways, and we don't quite have this kind of set understanding of what it is, then how in society are we going to do that as well? And you're right, you know, there's actually a complete misunderstanding of what stress is, and a lot of the work I do is coming from it in that point, is to try and look in the literature and the research and consolidate all of those definitions, working definitions, because actually it's not just one of them, it's all of them. Stress is it's an epidemic, you know, it's not just an emotion, it's psychological, it's sociological, it's a physical thing, you know, it's a physical entity, it's economical. You just need to look at the financial crisis at the minute. So we haven't actually, as a human race, fully grasped it or fully respected it yet. And I think that's a huge part of the problem.
Absolutely. And talking about definitions there, you know, burnout is something that is a term that has certainly been used so much more than perhaps 5 years ago. What would you say is the definition of burnout? Because I've heard many different definitions.
You know what? I think it was 2019, and I'm really bad with dates, but I think it was just 2019 that the World Health Organization finally categorized it or defined it as a condition, right? So up until then, it didn't exist. It didn't exist. And I do air quotes there, right? And I can say that actually for myself, because in 2017, I burnt out, and I was a university lecturer at the time, and I went to see an occupational health doctor. You had to get signed off from work. And this was all new to me at the time. And it really started my real deep dive into this area, this personal experience of burnout. And I didn't know what burnout was, but I remember going, and I'd read a little bit online, and I said to the guy, the doctor, I said, I think, you know, I might be burnt out. And he just kind of smirked, almost laughed, right? And said, burnout doesn't exist. People think it's a thing. It doesn't exist. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I feel something, and I beg to differ. That was the conversation. 2 years later, the World Health Organization defined it. However, I've got a lot of beef with that. So the definition of burnout as it stands, it's kind of flawed in many ways, and it puts a lot of blame into the workplace, actually, I think. So if you look at the definition, it's basically defined as a syndrome that comes from chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed, but it doesn't define who hasn't successfully managed it. Is it the workplace? Is it the individual? But equally, the fact that they've even got the term workplace within that definition, I don't think is the full picture. The lines are so blurred between people's workplace status anymore. Like, we work from home, we have portfolio careers, what is work and what is lifestyle at the moment? Like, people work within their passion. We've got online people young people coming up, and they've got careers that did never existed before, which is part of their lifestyle. There's no 9 to 5 anymore as such for certain people. So to make the assumption that burnout only exists within the workplace is heavily flawed. And actually there's increasing evidence that burnout exists in many people regardless of their occupational status. So I would argue that we really need to look at that a bit better, because it could probably exclude a lot of people who are suffering. And it makes the assumption that the workplace is to blame. Again, a lot to say on that. I think workplaces have a lot more work to do, but I think as individuals, we're better understanding what chronic stress and burnout is. We can equally take on some of the responsibility, not the blame. I'm not saying blame here, responsibility about how we manage ourselves and whether we want to be part of what I call the machine, and how do we do that? How do we perform optimally without burning out?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it doesn't make sense, if we're saying that burnout is a result of ongoing chronic stress or accumulation of stress that's not managed. And we know that stresses come from so many different elements. The workplace is just one element of that. So it doesn't make sense that we're then saying that burnout is only a result of
it's bizarre
stress in the workplace.
Yeah, you can't turn it off. You can't go, oh, that's your home stress, but that you stop that there, and that doesn't bleed into that. We're a physical entity. Stress affects us psychologically and physically, like I said, and all those hormones switch on and off. They don't switch off because the body knows it's workplace stress, and they don't switch on. It doesn't work like that. So to split the system or assume that we can just define it as one thing is heavily flawed, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And what would you say to someone who might come to you, or say you have a friend or a colleague who you think is kind of, on that edge or that brink of burnout, if there's such a thing, of the brink, not burnout. We know there's a thing. What would you say is perhaps a first step, or one thing that they can do to help stop that kind of tipping over?
Yeah, I think the first thing is absolutely to reach out and get help, to the right people. Sadly, again, I think it happens a lot. General practitioners or GPs are expected to know all, and they can't. I work a lot with trying to help educate them, and not in a patronizing way. They have a lot to learn. So sometimes our first protocol can be a GP, and we get knockbacks. But actually, a lot of my clients are telling me recently they've seen their GP, and the GPs encouraged them to get therapy or coaching. So I do think it's changing, especially as GPs experience burnout themselves. We know that in the NHS, they are working at extensive rates, and it's become more and more of a problem. So first of all is asking for that help. But when you do that, within that medical model, like I said, burnout and chronic stress is a physical thing. And there might be something else going on too. So I always say to people, encourage, especially when they come to me first, is, can you get some blood work done? Can you get an idea of what's going on in your body? Because actually that gives us a really good indication of how long somebody may have been chronically stressed. So we can see within hormones, we can see within white blood cells, red blood cells, iron levels, things like that. So it's a really nice, tangible biofeedback way of showing somebody and going, yeah, this is why you're overwhelmed. This is why you're broken. Look, and actually that can be really empowering and a huge relief to somebody, because again, the assumption is that they're somehow weak. And when we realize, no, hang on a minute, you've been so overwhelmed and so under-recovered that now your thyroid's affected, or your sex hormones have changed, especially in the female population, and people who identify as female, where their hormones have changed as a result, say, perimenopause. There's no coincidence that a significant proportion of the people I work with are females in early stages of perimenopause and menopause, because the symptoms of stress, the physiology of stress, significantly increases perimenopausal symptoms, for example. So that's really, really a great thing that people can do. And then after that, it's about, learning more about why you've ended up there. There's a lot work we can do in therapy and in coaching. So that's a great therapeutic approach, and talking about it. but learning about what has led you to that path, what is going on, how do you fit into that work setting or that life setting, and what are the sources of stress? Because when we understand what the key sources are, then we can start thinking about what their person's needs are, right? So maybe one individual might need, I don't know, need to exercise more, for example. There's a lot we can talk about on that, but another person might need just more sleep. Another person maybe trying to lose weight at the same time because they feel overwhelmed with stress, and actually that's caused a huge calorie deficit, which in itself is stressful. So looking at what you need and then giving that permission to yourself to give yourself what you need, it's huge. But we don't learn about that. We don't learn in school, or we don't learn from, in teenage years, or we don't learn from our family even, to honor ourselves first and give ourselves what we need. And so many people are suffering because they're putting their needs second, third, fourth, fifth to whatever it is that's driving them forward. And again, it's not a weakness, but once we flip that script, it's really empowering. But most importantly, something I try and help people with is they really, if they're at that breaking point or that brink, you just need time off.
Yeah.
And my job as a coach is to kind of help people. As you said earlier, people are reluctant to do that. It is to try and help people to gently, softly do that with permission, by having enough self-compassion to go, I deserve this, and actually I need it. Because here's the thing, if people don't take time off, they eventually are forced to take time off. And I see that a lot. It might be 3-6 months after working with me that people go, I'm really, I need to do it now. So they're the things people can do. And then absolutely people can build themselves back up with the right pacing and the right intervention, and actually go on to achieve bigger, better, and manage their performance in their careers and their families even so much better than they've ever done before. So there is hope.
Oh, yeah. And I think what's interesting there, just listening to you, Bernie, is that the kind of the signposting that you're recommending and the steps that you would take, they feel, I think going back to that point about the kind of the medical condition versus being stressed, I feel like with stress, there's so much more ambiguity about where would I go? What am I looking for? Is it a kind of a medical support that I need, or is it a lifestyle support? Would I go to my GP? Actually, would I go to my nutritionist and ask for some blood work? Would I go there? It feels so much more vague as to the path that I would take if I was someone who was experiencing chronic stress, or on the brink of burnout. And actually what you said about looking into the bloods, it's something that I feel like in this country we're really bad at doing. In the States, in Europe even, the first thing that the GP or alternative practitioner will say is, right, let's look at your blood work, let's see what's going on. Whereas I don't know whether it's a cost thing or people don't know to ask for that. But if having had experience of going to a GP and saying, I'd like to look into my nutrient levels, my iron levels, whatever it might be, there's a real hesitation to get those blood tests from the GP side often.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is potluck, it depends on who you get. Some of them will say it and say, we need to look at vitamin D, we need to look at vitamin B levels, right? And it's not to say, exactly as you're saying about seeing a nutritionist, it's not going, oh, now we need a supplement. We go explore your diet, explore your nutrition. There's very many reasons why people may be deficient in certain areas, but it can have such a powerful effect, right? Someone's iron deficient, and then we spend 6 weeks talking about how they're feeling, when actually, if we give them an iron supplement at the same time, that talking therapy or that therapeutic approach can land so much more effectively when we get the whole body system working in place. So for me, it has to be a biological component too, because we know that stress has a biological impact. So we almost need both in tandem. And you're right, it is hard to know where to go for those places. There are a lot of coaches online, there are a lot of people with different approaches to the work that they do. I think it's just about choosing someone with a kind of a holistic approach and doing your research, and not being afraid to ask for initial consultations, 30-minute consultations with people, whether it's GP or private or wherever it is. You need to get a feel for the right person, because it can be really disheartening and dismissive straight away if you get the wrong person. And then you go, well, mate, it's just me. And I've seen that. People walk away and they go back to the grindstone again. So I would say, don't be scared to shop around and find the right person with the right approach. If you feel like you need like blood work done, you know, you might pay privately. I know of companies that will support that. You can do that with. You might pay upwards of £100 for that blood screening, which give you a full screen of all those things. It might take a week to get back, but perhaps that's £100 well spent, you know, that will give you significant kind of information to move forward. So yeah, there are definitely options out there for people, and there is, and it's getting better, I think, as systems and people get better understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, and that's why it's so amazing that people like you are out there to be that holistic support, and direct people to the right kind of help and the things that they can do. So yeah, it's brilliant the work that you're doing, and I could talk to you forever, Bernie. It's yeah, we could talk about all sorts, but yeah, it's been really good to hear more about the work you do. And you know, as we said, it's Stress Awareness Month, but stress is here all year, unfortunately. So do get in touch. How would we get in touch with you, Bernie?
Yeah, so people can find me in the work that I do. I'm predominantly most active, I guess, on Instagram, which is Bernadette Dancy Stress Coach. I've probably got the longest Instagram name on the planet, but that's me. Or you can just find me on LinkedIn, which again is just my name, Bernadette Dancy, or you can find me on my website, which is bernadettedancy.co.uk.
Amazing. Thanks, Bernie.
Thank you so much.
Lovely to chat to you, and we will speak soon, I know.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. Take care.
All right, take care.